They thought she was just a nobody. But the moment her fingers touched the piano, the entire room froze. And what happened next left even the millionaire on his knees in disbelief. The city sparkled under luxury and privilege. Inside La Mirabelle, the most expensive restaurant in town, chandeliers hung like glowing crowns. Tables were surrounded by the wealthy, businessmen, socialites, investors, sipping wine and trading stories of success. In one corner sat a grand piano, polished, elegant, silent, forgotten among the noise of wealth. Then the door opened. She walked in, a simple woman, faded dress, worn sandals, a small handbag in one hand, a grocery bag in the other. Her presence didn't just surprise the room, it unsettled it. Eyes followed her. Whispers rose. Who is she? Is she lost? She doesn't belong here. But she wasn't looking for anyone. Her eyes bypassed the gold, the diamonds, the sneers, and locked on the piano. A soft longing filled her face, as though it wasn't an instrument, but a piece of her soul waiting to be touched again. The maitre d' rushed over, half smiling, half worried. Madam, do you have a reservation? She shook her head gently. No, I just need to sit, just for a moment. Hesitant, but not wanting to cause a scene, he led her to a corner table, away from the main floor, but not hidden enough to stop the judging glances. She sat down quietly, placed her grocery bag under her chair, and folded her hands in her lap. Her eyes never once left the piano. Across the room, a millionaire named Richard Harrington watched her. Known for his arrogance, he chuckled. Look at that. Lost. Maybe she thinks that piano's for her. His table laughed. But beneath the mockery, something deeper stirred, an unspoken discomfort. Because even they could feel there was something different about her, something they didn't understand. And soon the entire room was about to learn that greatness doesn't always wear diamonds. Sometimes it walks in with worn shoes and a grocery bag. Millionaire's arrogant challenge. The whispers didn't fade. If anything, they grew sharper, nastier, fueled by judgment disguised as curiosity. Forks hovered midair. Wine glasses clinked but were left untouched. Everyone waited, watching her like she was an unscheduled interruption to their perfectly rehearsed lives. At the far side of the room, Richard Harrington leaned further into his chair. His fingers lazily traced the rim of his whiskey glass. A smirk played on his lips, the kind that wasn't really about humor, but dominance. His friends, equally wealthy, equally arrogant, chuckled beside him. I mean, what is she doing here? He muttered, loud enough for others to hear. Look at her, sitting there like she's waiting for the lottery numbers to drop. His friend laughed, but Richard wasn't done. His eyes shifted to the piano, then back to the woman. A mischievous gleam sparked. He tilted his head, exhaling slowly, as if an idea, both amusing and cruel, had landed perfectly in his mind. Tell you what, he said, pushing his chair back slightly, tapping a waiter's arm. Go ask her if she's brave enough to play something for us. His grin widened. If she can actually pull off anything decent, her meal's on me. If not, well, at least we'll get some entertainment. The waiter froze. His face tightened. He wasn't comfortable being the messenger of mockery, but refusing a man like Richard wasn't an option. The whole restaurant tensed, pretending not to listen, but every ear was locked on this unfolding scene. Richard leaned in further, raising his glass. I'm serious. This place has standards. But let's have a little fun, shall we? His table erupted into knowing laughter. A few other guests smirked behind their menus. The waiter walked, slowly, almost unwillingly, toward her table. She sat just as before, hands folded, back straight, eyes unwavering on the piano, as if the world outside her line of sight didn't exist. Excuse me, madam. The waiter started, voice unsure. Mr. Harrington over there, he wonders if you would like to play the piano for everyone here. His words stumbled, but he forced them out. He said, if you can play something well, your meal is complimentary tonight. For the first time, she blinked. Slowly, her gaze shifted from the piano to the waiter, then calmly toward the millionaire's table. There was no anger in her eyes, no offense, no visible shame, only something far quieter and somehow far more unsettling. A long, tense silence wrapped the room. Everyone was waiting for her to wave it off, or maybe for her to walk out in humiliation. But instead, she tilted her head slightly, and for the first time that night, the ghost of a smile touched the corner of her lips. "Is that so?" she murmured quietly, barely above a whisper, but somehow it seemed the room heard every word. Her fingers lightly tapped the edge of her table, as though deciding not whether she could, but whether she should. And right there, a silent shift began. A subtle tension. A flicker of discomfort in the millionaire's smirk. Because in that brief moment, something about her expression didn't say, "I'm embarrassed." It said, "You have no idea what you've just started." The simple woman stands. The room holds its breath. A thick silence weighed down the entire restaurant. You could almost hear the heartbeat of the room. Forks were lowered. Conversations evaporated. Wine glasses trembled slightly in the hands of those who pretended not to watch, but couldn't tear their eyes away. At the millionaire's table, Richard Harrington leaned back further, his smirk growing wider. To him, this was a harmless joke. A cruel little game. After all, how could this woman, dressed like life had battered her for years, possibly touch a piano, let alone play something worth hearing? But over at her table, something changed. Her fingers, resting gently on the edge of the table, began to move. Not trembling, not nervous, but rhythmic, like muscle memory being awakened. Her eyes softened as she exhaled slowly, as if releasing something she had held inside for far too long. She reached down, pushed her chair back quietly, and stood. Not hastily, not defiantly, but with the grace of someone answering an invitation from an old friend. A friend named Destiny. Gasps echoed softly from a few tables. Heads turned openly now, no more pretending. Even the waiters paused mid-step. The bartender mid-pour let a few drops of champagne overflow the glass as he watched, mesmerized. The grocery bag still sat under her chair, untouched, forgotten. She took her first step toward the piano. Slow, deliberate. The clicking of her worn sandals against the marble echoed louder than the laughter from Richard's table. "Oh, she's really doing it," someone whispered. A woman near the window gripped her husband's arm tighter, unsure whether to feel pity or anticipation. But the most striking thing wasn't just that she was walking toward the piano. It was how she walked. No shame, no hesitation. Her back was straight, her chin lifted, not arrogantly, but with quiet dignity. The kind you only see in people who have endured life's worst storms and still stand tall. Richard raised his glass mockingly. "Well, let's hope the piano survives this," he chuckled, prompting another round of laughter from his table. But even his laughter now had a thin edge, a subtle shift, as if deep down a part of him wondered, "Wait, is this really happening?" She reached the piano, ran her fingers lightly across the glossy black surface. There was tenderness in her touch, the kind of touch you give something sacred, something lost, something found again. Her fingers hovered over the keys. For a brief second, they trembled, not from fear, but from the overwhelming rush of memories flooding back. Notes, chords, melodies, years of practice in another life, before that life was stolen away by reality. The room held its breath. The air felt heavier. Phones quietly lifted under tables, some pretending to be discreet, others bold, ready to capture the humiliation, or whatever this was about to become. And in the center of it all stood a simple woman, her hands ready, her eyes closed, her entire being sinking into the silence. Then, without warning, her fingers pressed down. The first note rang out, pure, clear, haunting, a sound so beautiful, so unexpectedly rich, that it cut through the tension like a sharp blade through silk. Heads snapped toward the piano. Eyebrows shot up. Conversations died completely. Because, in that single note, the entire room realized something none of them had expected. This was not going to be a joke. Her fingers began to dance. The first notes silenced the room. The first note hung in the air like a sacred whisper. Clear, strong, emotionally pure. It wasn't hesitant. It wasn't shy. It was deliberate, like a single drop of rain falling into a still lake, causing a ripple that traveled far beyond what the eye could see. For a moment, the entire restaurant froze mid-breath. Conversations halted completely, now not just out of politeness, but out of something deeper: confusion, curiosity, even disbelief. Her fingers didn't pause. With grace that seemed to come from another world, she let her right hand fall into the melody. Then her left followed, deeper, fuller chords blending with the delicate high notes, like old friends meeting after years apart. And suddenly, La Mirabelle, the restaurant that prided itself on expensive silence and fake laughter, was filled with something real: music. Not just any music, but music that told a story. A story of longing, heartbreak, strength, survival. Each note she played seemed to tug at the very air in the room. You could feel it vibrating against the chandeliers, sneaking beneath the heavy velvet curtains, curling around wine glasses and whispered judgments, breaking them down like dust in the sunlight. Waiters stood frozen mid-step, their trays shaking slightly in their hands. Couples who had spent the evening staring at their phones were now watching her with wide eyes. One elderly couple near the back, people who had known real struggle in their youth, exchanged a look. The woman placed her hand gently over her husband's, both of them visibly moved. Even the millionaire's table went silent. Richard Harrington, who moments ago had been laughing the loudest, now sat with his glass halfway to his lips, forgotten. His smirk faltered. The color in his face shifted, not from embarrassment just yet, but from something more dangerous: disbelief. "No way," one of his friends muttered, barely able to finish the sentence. Because this wasn't beginner-level playing. This wasn't some clumsy, emotional attempt from an amateur. This was mastery. Years, maybe decades, of practiced hands knowing exactly where every key lived. Her eyes stayed closed as she played, her body swaying gently with the rhythm. Not for the audience, but for herself. As if, for the first time in years, she was breathing again. The melody swelled, growing richer, deeper. Her hands danced across the keys faster now, climbing into complex arpeggios and soulful progressions that most people in the room couldn't even name, but could feel deep in their chest. Somewhere near the front, a young woman recording on her phone gasped audibly, whispering to her friend, "Who is she?" The entire energy of the room shifted, from mockery to awe, from judgment to stunned silence. And as her song soared to its first emotional climax, you could almost feel a collective lump form in every throat in that room. For a woman they didn't know, in a dress they laughed at, with shoes they'd never wear, was now commanding their hearts, with nothing but her hands and a piano. And no one, not even Richard Harrington, could look away. Shock turns into awe. The room completely transforms. The melody twisted, higher, faster, deeper. Her fingers raced across the ivory keys, weaving sound into emotion like threads in a tapestry. But this wasn't just music anymore. This was soul. This was survival. This was the sound of a life that had fought battles the rich in this room could never even imagine. No one was eating now. Forks lay abandoned. Champagne fizzed quietly in untouched glasses. Waiters who had once floated through the restaurant like polished dancers now stood stock still, eyes wide, jaw slack. A woman near the center, dripping in diamonds moments ago, confidence shining brighter than her jewelry, now sat with her hand covering her mouth. Her mascara quietly threatened to betray her as her eyes misted. The song wasn't loud, yet it filled every corner of the room. It seeped into the cracks of marble floors, wrapped around the chandelier crystals, and echoed through the very bones of the walls. People felt it in their skin, in their hearts. It reminded them of something they didn't even realize they'd forgotten: what it means to feel something real. Even the younger crowd, influencers, rich kids who lived online more than in real life, slowly lowered their phones. Recording felt wrong now. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was sacred. And at the millionaire's table, something cracked. Richard Harrington, the man whose voice once filled this room with arrogance, sat frozen. His confident grin was gone, replaced by something much smaller, much quieter, something resembling humility? Or was it fear? Fear of being wrong. fear of being reminded that all the money in the world couldn't manufacture this. His friends shifted uncomfortably. One tapped his fingers nervously against the glass. Another adjusted his cufflinks, as if the act of looking busy could distract from the undeniable truth unfolding just meters away. "Who is she?" one of them muttered under his breath. Not mockery this time. Genuine, stunned confusion. Richard didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat felt tight. His heartbeat irregular. Because deep down, something about her music felt familiar. Not the notes. Not the melody itself. But the weight of it. The echo of struggle. The sound of someone who had lost and still found a way to rise. And perhaps, though he would never admit it, it reminded him of the man he used to be. Before the money. Before the arrogance. Back when he had struggled. When he had fought to prove his worth to the world. That realization stung. The woman didn't see the reactions. Or maybe she didn't care. Her eyes remained closed, her hands still dancing, pouring her entire life into the keys. Every note told a story. Of hope. Of heartbreak. Of dreams deferred but never fully destroyed. Of strength disguised in simplicity. And as the song approached its peak, the energy in the room shifted from awe to something else. Something sacred. A realization dawned across the faces of everyone watching. Something universal, undeniable. That sometimes life hides greatness in the most unexpected people. And tonight they were witnessing it. The final note holds the room hostage. A silence that screams. Her hands moved faster now, not in a rush, but in a release. Like everything she'd ever carried, every burden, every disappointment, every quiet sacrifice was pouring out of her fingertips. The melody rose like a wave, towering, overwhelming, ready to crash down on every person sitting in that luxurious prison of marble and chandeliers. And then, as quickly as it soared, it softened. Her fingers slowed. The notes became fragile, delicate, like whispers from a forgotten past. The heavy bass chords faded into soft trickles of sound. High keys fluttered like memories trying to stay alive. A single, final chord lingered. Her fingers hovered over the keys, pressing gently, letting it ring out longer, longer, as if refusing to let go of the moment. And then, silence. Not the awkward kind. Not the heavy, judgmental kind that had filled the room when she first walked in. No, this was a sacred silence. The kind that only happens after something truly magnificent. No one moved. No one breathed. It was as if the entire restaurant forgot how to function. She slowly opened her eyes, the first time since the song began. And when she did, something unspoken passed between her and everyone watching. A powerful, invisible message. "You thought you knew me, but you never even saw me." Her gaze briefly floated toward Richard Harrington's table. Not with anger. Not with revenge. Just with the simple power of truth. And in that moment, he looked down. The man who had spent his life towering over others suddenly couldn't meet the eyes of a woman in worn sandals. Her hands gently slid away from the keys. She stood up gracefully, silently, as if the piano had never been touched, leaving nothing behind but echoes and a room full of broken assumptions. For a few eternal seconds, the silence held. Then, somewhere near the back, a single pair of hands clapped. Softly, tentatively, unsure. Then another, and another, until the silence exploded into thunderous applause. Not the polite, forced kind. Not the fake, social ladder climbing kind. This was raw, real. From the gut, from the heart, people stood, one by one. First the elderly couple, then the young woman with the phone, now forgotten in her hand. Then the table of skeptics near the window. Applause turned into cheers. Some clapped, some whistled. Others stood there, stunned, tears shining in their eyes, unable to process what they had just witnessed. The simple woman didn't bow, didn't smile broadly. She merely nodded, a small, grateful gesture. The kind that said, "I didn't do this to impress you. I did this because it's who I am." And as the applause roared, something else happened. Something the millionaire had never, ever felt before in this room. He disappeared. For the first time, no one was looking at him. All eyes, all admiration, belonged to the woman he had tried to humiliate. And he felt it. Deep. Sharp. A wound to his pride that no amount of money could ever heal. As the echoes of applause filled every inch of La Mirabelle, the simple woman quietly stepped away from the grand piano. No grand bow. No exaggerated gesture. Just a gentle lowering of her hands, as though placing her soul carefully back inside her chest. Her face wasn't glowing with arrogance. It wasn't prideful. No, it was something far deeper, a peaceful stillness, like someone who had carried a heavy burden for years, finally allowed to set it down. But the crowd? They were anything but still. A rush of energy broke through the room like a tidal wave. People surged toward her, not aggressively, but with awe. A magnetic pull that no one could resist. Excuse me, ma'am. I have to say, that was breathtaking, stammered a middle-aged man in an Armani suit, who had earlier barely spared her a glance. A young woman, who moments ago was snapping photos of her expensive dessert, now stood clutching her chest, her voice trembling. It felt like you were telling my life story. Without words, how? Even the couple in the corner, who hadn't spoken to anyone all evening, rose quietly and simply nodded toward her, their eyes glistening with unshed tears. Waiters, who once gave her dismissive glances, now stood tall, hands respectfully crossed in front of them, their expressions softened, transformed. Even the maitre d', the very man who had escorted her to the least desirable table, now looked at her like he was in the presence of royalty. It was as if the very fabric of the restaurant had shifted. The lines between wealthy and poor, VIP and outsider, had dissolved. For once, just once, it wasn't about who wore the most expensive suit, but who carried the richest soul. But in one corner, the air was suffocating. Richard Harrington sat frozen, shoulders stiff, his face pale, lips pressed into a thin line. His fingers gripped the heavy crystal whiskey glass, so tightly it seemed a miracle it hadn't cracked under the pressure. His friends? No, better. One pretended to check his watch, over and over, like time itself could save him. Another scrolled through his phone, though the screen was dark, an obvious escape from the unbearable discomfort. No one at Richard's table spoke. Because what could they say? No sarcastic joke could fill this silence. No dismissive laugh could erase the sheer humiliation radiating toward them like a spotlight. Richard's smirk, his trademark armor, was long gone. His confidence had evaporated. All that remained was the raw sting of realization. He had completely misjudged her. No, worse than that. He had underestimated the very thing his wealth could never buy, true greatness. His throat tightened. His chest burned, not with anger, but with a terrible mix of shame, and something even more foreign to him, regret. For a fleeting moment, he thought of getting up, walking over, saying something, anything, a compliment, an apology, a joke to lighten the air. But he couldn't. His legs felt heavy, his tongue useless, because deep down he knew no words could fix what arrogance had broken. And as he sat there, drowning in a silence no amount of money could rescue him from, the simple woman did the most devastating thing possible. She smiled. Not a smug smile, not a cruel one, but a small, soft smile. A smile of someone who had fought wars in silence her entire life, and had won, without lifting a single weapon. She returned to her table, quietly picked up her grocery bag, crossed her hands in her lap, her back straight, her eyes calm, as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just rewritten every rule of status, value, and worth in that room. And yet, the applause didn't stop. If anything, it grew. Louder. Stronger. People stood. A standing ovation from those who wouldn't have held the door open for her an hour ago. Where did she learn that? Someone whispered. Who is she? Why haven't we heard of her? Another gasped. The whispers were frantic now, not with mockery, but with desperation to know her story. But none of them, not the cheering crowd, not the humbled millionaire, not a single soul in that grand, glittering restaurant, had the slightest idea that the biggest twist of all was still waiting. The billionaire's shocking realization, her true identity, unveiled. As the applause began to settle, not because anyone wanted it to stop, but because they simply ran out of strength from clapping, the simple woman remained seated, calm, composed, almost detached from the chaos she had created. The maitre d' approached her table again, this time not with hesitation, but with the reverence reserved for dignitaries. "Madam, would you care for anything else? Truly, it's on the house." His voice was softer now, even trembling slightly. She smiled kindly. "No, thank you. I won't be staying long." But even as she spoke, the restaurant doors suddenly swung open, not dramatically, but with a smooth, purposeful motion that instantly shifted every head in the room. In walked a sharply dressed man, tailored suit, polished shoes, posture that radiated power. But this was not just any man. It was Mr. Lewis Hartman, a name that, to the rich of this city, wasn't just a name. It was a legend. The elusive billionaire investor who owned half the real estate downtown, an art collector, and the silent partner behind La Mirabelle itself. Few had ever seen him in person. Fewer still had ever spoken to him. Richard Harrington's face drained of all color. His hands shook. His mind raced. Why is Hartman here? Tonight? Now? What's going on? Mr. Hartman walked swiftly but calmly toward one person. Not Richard. Not any of the wealthy, powerful figures scattered around the room. No, he walked straight to the simple woman, and without hesitation, he leaned down and gently placed his hand on her shoulder. His face softened. His voice, so rarely heard, was filled with something this room had never imagined possible from a man of his stature. "Darling, I'm so sorry I'm late." Gasps exploded from every corner of the restaurant. Did he just call her darling? No, no way, no. What is happening? The simple woman smiled, standing up gracefully, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. She reached up, gently squeezed his hand. "It's all right. I was keeping myself busy," she said, glancing ever so slightly at the piano. Mr. Hartman chuckled softly. "So I heard, from halfway down the street." The entire block practically stopped to listen. Then, as if remembering, he turned his gaze slowly across the room. His eyes scanned every face. Calm, piercing, razor sharp. And then they landed on Richard Harrington. Richard felt his stomach flip. Panic tightened his throat. He instinctively straightened his jacket, tried to sit taller, forced a smile that was now more grimace than grin. Mr. Hartman stared directly at him, his expression unreadable, until it wasn't. "I believe," Hartman's voice carried like a quiet storm, "someone here owes my wife an apology." Silence. A deafening, crushing silence. "W. wife," someone whispered. Someone else gasped so loud it echoed against the marble. Richard's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. No words came. His usual weapon, confidence, had utterly abandoned him. His hands trembled visibly now. His lips trembled. His entire world tilted sideways. His voice finally cracked out, weak, fragile. I didn't know. I thought. We didn't." Mr. Hartman raised an eyebrow, letting the tension slice the air like a knife. "You thought what?" His tone never rose, yet it hit like thunder. That judging someone by their shoes and their dress was a measure of worth. He took a step forward. "You thought mocking my wife would somehow make you taller?" Richard shrank. Literally. His spine curled. His face burned crimson. The man who once held the room hostage with his arrogance was now smaller than the grocery bag sitting by the woman's chair. The rest of the room? Silent. Frozen. No one dared breathe. Because the realization was now fully sinking in. This wasn't just some simple woman. This wasn't someone who accidentally wandered into wealth. This was Mrs. Eleanor Hartman, the woman who years before her marriage to the billionaire had been a world-class pianist, a child prodigy whose career had been tragically interrupted by family loss, financial hardship, and personal sacrifice. A story that had been buried, forgotten by most, unknown to those who lived only in circles of wealth and status. Until tonight, until now, the confrontation, a lesson money could never teach. The tension in La Mirabelle was suffocating. Not a sound, not a clink of glass, not a whisper, not even a breath. All eyes were locked on one scene. The most powerful man in the city, standing beside a woman the world had just dismissed as insignificant. And across from him, the once confident, smug, untouchable millionaire, Richard Harrington, now shrinking, pale, visibly trembling in his $7,000 suit. Mr. Hartman's eyes narrowed. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The weight behind every word was heavier than stone. "Funny, isn't it?" he said, scanning the room slowly. "How quickly people show you exactly who they are, the moment they think you are beneath them." A ripple of shame swept through the crowd. Heads lowered. People avoided eye contact. Guests who had laughed earlier now quietly shuffled napkins or stared deep into their wine glasses, wishing they could disappear. Richard swallowed hard. His mouth opened, trying to form an excuse, a defense, anything. But nothing came. His arrogance had evaporated. His mind, usually quick with witty sarcasm, was now empty, hollow like the facade he'd built around his wealth. I didn't know. I swear. I didn't know who she was," Richard finally stammered, his voice cracking like thin glass. Mr. Hartman's expression hardened. And if she wasn't someone, then what? She was worthless? Invisible? Disposable? His gaze sharpened further. "Is that how you measure people? By how they look? By their shoes? Their wallet?" Richard shrank deeper into his chair. His hands trembled. Beads of sweat dotted his forehead. He tried to speak, again, but his lips quivered uselessly. The entire restaurant was dead silent. Even the waiters stood frozen, realizing this wasn't just a confrontation. This was a reckoning. Mr. Hartman exhaled slowly, then spoke, softer this time, but somehow heavier than before. "Let me teach you something, Mr. Harrington, something your money will never buy you. My wife is the strongest person I've ever met." His hand rested gently on her shoulder. She gave up her career, her dreams, to care for her family. She walked away from grand stages, world tours, and fame because life demanded sacrifice. She endured more in a year than most of you will in a lifetime of comfort. He turned, addressing not just Richard now, but the entire restaurant. And yet, despite it all, her worth was never reduced to a handbag, or a designer label, or the car she drove. Her worth is here, he tapped his chest, and here. He pointed to her hands. In her spirit, in her resilience, in her talent, and in her heart. And tonight, you were given the chance to witness it. The crowd stood still. Some guests wiped away silent tears. Others stared, frozen, completely shattered by the truth. Richard had no escape, no out. His empire of pride collapsed around him. And, in front of everyone, he did something no one in this room had ever seen him do. He stood slowly, his head bowed, shoulders slumped, and whispered, barely audible, I'm sorry." But even his apology felt small, not because it wasn't real, but because it arrived far too late. Eleanor, the simple woman who was anything but simple, didn't respond with anger, didn't lash out. She merely met his eyes, calm, composed, and said with grace, "Let this be the day you finally learn. True worth isn't worn. It's lived." Her words hit harder than any slap could have. The millionaire, for the first time in his entire life, felt what it was like to be small. The crowd, still hushed, began to clap again, not for Richard, not out of awkwardness, but for her, for truth, for the reminder that greatness has nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with heart. The walkout, a lesson etched into every soul. As the tension slowly unraveled, replaced now with stunned silence and reflective stares, Eleanor, the simple woman who had just shattered the illusion of status, slowly rose from her chair. Her grocery bag, humble as ever, still rested by her side. She bent down, picked it up, dusted off the corner, and slipped the handles over her wrist, as casually as if nothing had happened. And maybe to her, nothing had happened. Because dignity? It was hers long, before anyone else noticed. She turned to Mr. Hartman, her husband, who simply extended his hand. His eyes weren't filled with pride in the sense of ownership, but pride in the sense of deep respect. The kind of respect that only grows when you've witnessed someone survive storms that would have drowned anyone else. Together, hand in hand, they began walking toward the restaurant exit. And as they did, the crowd, without a word, began to part. Not out of fear, not out of obligation, but out of something deeper. Something the wealthy often forget how to feel. Reverence. Some people lowered their heads. Others simply watched, unable to look away, their faces reflecting a kaleidoscope of emotions: guilt, admiration, regret, awe. Eleanor walked gracefully, her back straight, her head high, not because she was trying to prove anything, but because for the first time in years, the world was finally seeing her for who she had always been. As she passed Richard's table, she didn't sneer, didn't gloat, didn't even glance for long. Just a brief moment, enough for him to feel the full weight of what had been lost tonight. His own dignity. Richard sat there, hollow, dismantled, stripped of the armor money had always provided him. His hands gripped the edge of the table, staring blankly at nothing, as if hoping this was a nightmare he might wake from. But it wasn't. This was real. As Eleanor and Mr. Hartman reached the door, a voice, soft, hesitant, finally broke the silence. "Excuse me." A young woman near the window spoke, her voice trembling. "Thank you for reminding us what real beauty looks like." Eleanor paused, turned her head slightly, offered the warmest smile, not just to her, but to the entire room. It was always there, you just needed to listen. And with that, the doors opened. A soft evening breeze rolled in, fluttering the linen curtains. The couple stepped out, not as a billionaire and his wealthy wife, but as two souls who understood something most people in that room might spend their whole lives never learning. The doors closed behind them with a gentle click. Inside, the restaurant silence. But it wasn't the silence of discomfort anymore. It was the silence of reflection, of realization, of transformation. Some guests sat back, staring at nothing, processing the lesson life had just thrown at them like a lightning bolt. Others whispered apologies, not to anyone in particular, but perhaps to the versions of themselves they were ashamed of. Even the staff, waiters, bartenders, the maitre d', found themselves seeing their roles differently now. Because in the span of an hour, they had all witnessed something no amount of money, luxury, or status could ever manufacture. The raw, undeniable truth that real worth is never worn on the outside. It lives quietly in the soul. And as the camera fades, as the music softens, as the story draws its final breath, one question remains echoing in the minds of every viewer. How many extraordinary people have I walked past and never even noticed?